I'm Tyler Souters at the 2010 EnergyBiz Leadership Forum here in Washington, and with me now is the President, Chairman, and CEO of PSE&G and one of the keynote speakers here this year, Ralph Izzo. Ralph, thanks for being with us.
My pleasure. Thank you.
I want to read a quote from your keynote address to you today. We need to rethink the role of the utility if we're going to meet this challenge being the turn to clean energy. What is involved in that rethinking? How dramatic is it?
So the rethinking the role of utility basically is to use it as an effective participant where the market is not meeting the needs of society. Specifically, renewable energy is more expensive than traditional forms of electricity. And what we need is a legislated, regulatorily mandated renewable portfolio standard, and then allow utilities to be the investors in bringing about the renewable resources that are required by setting of that standard.
Now, we've talked for some time about the idea of renewable electricity standard. What is emerging now in the Senate climate legislation seems to be a clean energy electricity standard, which could include nuclear as a baseload source. Is it okay in your mind to broaden out that spectrum and make it more inclusive?
So it is, but I think that should be done in two steps. I think the first step, and by far the most important step, is to put a price on carbon. That will allow the market to be as efficient as it can possibly be, because now an externality, long-term environmental consequences of climate change, will be explicitly in the price of electricity. Then you should allow competition to take place with that price of carbon in there. That will help nuclear. That will help natural gas to a certain extent. It will harm coal. It probably won't be enough to get solar and wind ubiquitously developed around the country. To get the kind of carbon price that would justify solar, for example, to be a competitive market entrant, would be a carbon price that I don't think society is willing to pay, measured in the hundreds, if not many hundreds of dollars per ton.
When you say society isn't willing to pay, Ralph, are you talking about individual customers and the potential rise in their utility bills?
I do. I also mean the commercial and industrial sector. They would just see, gee, why are we combating global climate change as just a single nation, notwithstanding the leadership benefit of doing so. So to get the next wave of carbon-free energy that you alluded to, you then need to impose this clean energy standard, which is simply to say, okay, so the price of carbon is X, but if we're going to get other industries developed and underway, much like the Chinese have done, much like the Japanese have done, much like the Germans and the Spanish have done, we now need to give this additional regulatory pull to the solar business and to the wind business. And that would be the second component that I would allow any carbon-free source to benefit from.
Now, in your address today, you once again advocated a cap-and-trade system, which seems to be on the ropes right now regarding the Senate climate legislation. Last week, Thomas Kuhn with EEI, of which you were a board member, said that cap and dividend or some of the other options aren't really viable in the eyes of utilities. Is cap and trade the only way to go right now to get that price on carbon that you want to see as utilities?
So let me make clear that I'm speaking for PSEG and not EEI when I say that number one priority is a price on carbon. What I like about cap and trade is that it takes the price on carbon and then allows the market to come forward with solutions. If there's another approach to get a price on carbon and allow the market to come forward, I'm all for that. The benefit of the allocation formula that I've been a proponent of is that it takes the cost of carbon emissions and returns it to customers. So it mitigates some of the impact on customers. As I understand various other proposals, it would take the costs associated with carbon emissions and return it to American citizens in other ways, in proportion to their tax bill, in proportion to their percentage of the population. All of those, I think, are worthwhile discussing. As a company, we would not a priori be opposed to any other way of recycling the dollars. What's most important is that there be a price on carbon that gets into the marketplace so we can be guided by that in making our investment decisions.
Ralph, final question. If there is a structured cap and trade system or a varied system regarding the sectors in the U.S., will utilities complain the loudest and the longest if they are capped, or will they suffer the most?
I don't think it'll be either, and I hope that utilities don't balk at being the first to go. I think that makes enormous sense. I think if you're going to do something about climate change, you have to do something about two things. Number one is transportation. Well, let's electrify transportation. And then number two would subsume number one and and that would be electricity. So if you're going to regulate carbon in the electric sector and you electrify transportation, you will have captured the two biggest sources of carbon that our nation faces. So why not start there?
All right, Ralph Izzo, always generous with your time. Thank you for being with us.
My pleasure.
And thank you for joining us as well. I'm Tyler Suiters, and you're watching Clean Skies News.